just ordered more masks too, so we'll have those. Got a few in there still, but by Friday I'll probably be out. All righty, well, welcome to the two folks who are here in person. Thank you. You might get an abnormal amount of eye contact today, so which I apologize in advance. That happened to some folks in my class on Friday after y'all. So I'm going to go ahead and do a quick attendance. I was just reordering some masks because I'm running a little low and I want to make sure y'all have them if you need them. And I'm just going to take attendance real quick here. Hello, 3 people. Woohoo! I mean, all joking aside, I do appreciate those of you who are sick not coming in and infecting us. So thank you for being on Zoom. All right, and while I am doing this, while I'm getting y'all checked in, let me sort of reiterate the schedule coming up here. So this week, all 3 days, we're going to be covering social psychology. And then next Monday, a week from today, we don't have class because it is fall break. Thank you. I was like, it is the day we get off. So when you get back from fall break, we'll have a catch-up / review day. And then that following Friday, so a week from Friday, I'll give out the next exam and y'all will actually have all weekend to work on it this time. So if you are sick around that time and not going to be able to come in person to pick that up, please email me and we'll figure out a way to get it to you. You know, whether a friend can drop it off for you or something along those lines. And I apologize. I know good and well from the pandemic, I cannot talk and check people's names off at the same time. And I was trying to do it. So it's just going to take me another quick minute to get everybody in here. And again, the main reason I do this, the main reason I take attendance is to just check in on people. If you're missing for like a week, I'm probably going to get in touch with you and say, hey, you okay? You alive? Do we need to send, you know, people over there to help you? So double checking, but I think I got everybody on the list. Just one other person. Nope. All righty. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and screen share. Oh, I think I'm already screen sharing. Yay. I'll go ahead and put this in slideshow mode. Sure.
I don't even know kind of what I'm asking. Last class, we kind of briefly mentioned, I think it was the psychology experience credits. I just kind of wanted to make sure I understood what we had to do.
Sure. That's a really good question. So the psychology experience credits, ideally within the next couple of weeks, there will be at least a couple studies you'll be able to participate in if you're willing to do that. And then what you do is you participate in a study. Most of the time now they're like surveys online, and then you write a brief reflection about your experience taking part in that study and the questions with prompts for during the syllabus. And then if you can't find studies or there are studies at work, or unfortunately there might only be a few studies posted this semester, then what you can do is find articles from psychological journals, and you kind of do similar prompts where you read the article and then write about it.
So say we do like either, so for the studies, how many studies would we have to do? And then for the articles, how many articles?
Good question. So you have to have 4 psychology experience credits altogether, and they could be any combo of those. Yeah, I know for a fact I'm gonna have a study posted within the next week or so y'all can participate in. And then hopefully within the next 2 weeks or 3 weeks, I'll have another one up. And usually Dr. Ariel has a study, but I don't know if he's got anything rolling this semester or not.
And then where can we find this stuff?
Sure, so if you go to your syllabus, there should be a link to Sona Systems. And when you go there, it'll ask you, if it's your first time there, it'll ask you to set up an account. And then Dr. Ariel will approve your account, and then you can take part in any studies that are posted. Great questions that I'm sure a lot of other people had, so thank you for asking those. Any other logistical questions? I know I still haven't graded stuff for you all, and I really apologize. On the weekends, I'm honestly trying to like step away and like give myself some downtime, and that's been really mentally healthy for me. But I do plan to catch up. If not this week, definitely over fall breaks. Y'all will know where you stand. I also plan to have the Explain It to the Media quiz for this chapter posted by Wednesday at the latest. Any other logistical questions, either anyone on Zoom or anyone here in person? Oh, looks like we might have had a few more people join on Zoom, so let me just do another quick check here. The fun of this, y'all, is that Zoom puts you in alphabetical order by first name when I look at it. So then I have to like translate it over. There we go. All righty. Awesome. Okie dokie. Well, today we're going to start talking about social psych, and social psych has arguably some of the most interesting topics in psychology. Social psychology is also, this and industrial organizational psychology are two of the main reasons why our field is so attractive to like Fortune 500 companies. Because the stuff we'll talk about in social psych can be used in advertising and media, or just helping you work with other people. I'm gonna try and cut a little bit of the light here. Yeah, so we'll have to failure. I think that's slightly better. All righty. All right, so the first thing we're going to talk about is close relationships. And one thing I'll say is that typically when we talk about close relationships, people think about romantic relationships. And those are certainly a type of close relationship, but it goes beyond that. The close relationships are those that are important, interdependent, and long-lasting. So important, interdependent, and long-lasting. So they have importance or meaning in your life. In terms of interdependent, it's like each of you contributes something to the other. It's not one-sided. And long-lasting, whether that be months, years, decades in some cases. And they come in many different forms, including family relationships, friendships, work relationships, romantic relationships, and marriage. Now, in terms of culture, cultures vary in their emphasis on romantic love as a basis for marriage. So individualistic cultures like the US tend to fully embrace the idea of marriage for love as the ultimate expression of close relationships, but also in some ways of expression of individualism. In collectivist cultures, however, which tend to be more folks from East Asia, South Asia, Africa, other cultures along those lines, marriage are more likely, that doesn't mean they always have to be, but they're more likely to be arranged by families. And in those cases, the idea is that there's something important, sometimes strategic, about joining the families themselves. That the marriage between these two individuals cements that. So arranged marriages are still common in many parts of the world, including India, Japan, China, and parts of Western Africa. And in India, for example, they find that they've studied these arranged marriages, and they find that the love tends to increase over time. So some extreme examples of arranged marriages, you might only meet like a couple times or even just meet the day of your wedding. So you don't know this person, but your love might grow and develop and over time. Sometimes in marriages for love, the quality of love actually decreases over time, right? So there are advantages and disadvantages to both. Now, obviously, we live in an era where, especially during the pandemic, a lot of our relationships were virtual, right? So are internet or virtual relationships as close as face-to-face relationships? Well, research even before the pandemic said yes, they are as close and as stable as traditional relationships. And again, this is not just romantic relationships, but can be friendships that we form through, online communities, things along those lines. In fact, the anonymity of online interactions may facilitate a closeness because people feel less wary or scared about self-disclosure. You might be more likely to open up because this person doesn't know you and doesn't know your name, right? However, an important note here is that this assumes that the individual is presenting an honest persona online, that they're not catfishing or, trying to be older than they are or, deceive people in some other way. Obviously, if any of those things are coming into play, this will not be a healthy online friendship or romantic relationship. But there are many possible advantages to meeting people online. There are no problems of geography. If you are someone who has health issues and it's difficult for you to leave the house, then this can open up the world of friendships or romantic relationships. Same thing as if you have transportation issues, right? Now you can still communicate regardless. People who have social anxiety, there are studies that for people who have social anxiety and people who have depression, it's actually really beneficial to form online friendships, that they find support and they find that they can do it in a way that feels safe to them. There's also research about specific internet groups. So these be like, back in the day, sort of like message boards or chat rooms, or now there might be like a Facebook group or something along those lines. So for example, those for people with medical diseases are found to be very helpful. So support groups, online support groups for folks with cancer diagnoses or HIV can be really, really helpful. Another example is I know the Trevor Project, who runs the suicide hotline for LGBTQ youth. They have their own social media site called Trevor Space, where people can connect with folks around the country who might be going through similar issues to them. Now, let's turn to romantic relationships in particular. And there are three primary factors that underlie initial romantic attraction between strangers. One is just proximity. Again, the internet is kind of wearing this down a little bit, but in general, we're more likely to become involved with people who are geographically or spatially close to us. So this is why you might see people dating people who live in the same village more often here on campus, right? And we know that long-term relationships can work, but they can also be a struggle sometimes. Proximity effects are easy to see. Studies of students living in a community found that people who had doors facing an interior courtyard had 2 times as many friends even as those who had doors facing away from that courtyard. Also, we're just more likely to become friends with people who live nearby, which might go into a romantic relationship. Again, not always, but sometimes that is the basis for it. Then there's familiarity. So there's something called the mere exposure effect, that we are more likely to develop positive feelings toward a person, the more often we see them. Now, this is not universal. As we all might have that one person who just really annoys us, right? And when you're around them more often, they just annoy you more, right? So this is not absolute. None of these theories are absolute. But in general, often we find the more we interact with someone, the more positive our feelings are towards that person. The mere exposure effect make it much more likely that we'll even just talk to the person and ultimately establish some type of relationship with them. But as I mentioned, if we initially hate someone, it will often only get stronger over time. And then physical attractiveness. So this plays a key role in face-to-face romantic relationships, but also in friendships, which I think is really interesting. But the results are also really inconsistent between what people report and what they do. So if you ask people like, what are the most important characteristics in a romantic partner? They'll be like, oh, their hearts, their personality. But in real life, they might go more towards that like more attractive person. And again, sometimes this can go into friend groups, and there's some interesting studies about sort of like similar levels of attractiveness type people tending to date and hang out with each other, which is all very subjective, obviously, depending on who's rating it and what culture you're in. So what does make someone attractive? So facial features. We as humans tend to narrow in on faces right away. Simply because that's how we communicate, that's how we talk. I mean, this is why things like Zoom became very popular during the pandemic, because in theory, you can sort of be face to face, right? So the facial features that are found more attractive for women, sort of in women, I should say, are baby face features. So having things like large eyes, small nose, but then also some mature features like prominent cheekbones. So I don't know, some sort of weird combination of youth and wisdom there, right? In men, the facial features that tend to be considered the most attractive are a strong jawline and a broad forehead. And again, this is going to vary drastically from culture to culture, right? This is like within mainstream American culture. I also have to fully acknowledge that these are very, heteronormative. They're also often sort of centered around the white ideal, right? So fully acknowledging that there are racism and heterosexism built into these ideals, quote unquote. In terms of bodily features, physique features found most attractive in women, tends to be what they call an average weight, and then having an hourglass figure and medium-sized breasts. So I think the epitome of the expression of this right now is sort of the Kardashian Jenners, right? Which we all know they didn't all get that way naturally, right? So there are people who will modify their body surgically or with other measures to try to reach these attractiveness ideals. And some of those are less invasive than others, right? You can wear flattering clothing, and that's way less invasive than, getting a major surgery or even wearing something like a waist trainer, which is essentially an old-fashioned corset. And fun fact, there's a museum in Philadelphia called the Mutter Museum of Medical Oddities. And one of the things they have there is the rib cage of someone who wore a corset their whole life next to a normal rib cage. And a normal rib cage, if you remember basic anatomy, is kind of a triangle. It sort of goes out like this. The corseted rib cage went back in. It was sort of like semicircles. So not surprisingly, that can like squish your organs, things like that. Things that aren't generally good for physical health, right? And then for men, it is a triangle. So broad shoulders, slim waist. And physical attractiveness, oftentimes the research tries to argue that it's more important to men than to women. But if you look a little further into the research, it's like, yeah, women might list something else as number one, but they're listing attractiveness as like number 2 or 3 and their most important thing. So I don't know that we can argue that it's not important to women, right? And again, these are all heterosexual specific norms. Among newlyweds, men emphasize their material resources to appeal to the spouse while dating, whereas women worked at enhancing their appearance. And again, I think that there's something dated to this, right? And there is still an element of this, but I believe it's over half of the households in the US now, the woman is either the primary breadwinner or at the very least a co-breadwinner. So my guess is that's gonna start fading out more quickly. So if we're talking about attraction here, we're gonna come back around to what I mentioned about sort of the similar levels of attractiveness, and this is called the matching hypothesis. This proposes that people with similar levels of physical attractiveness gravitate towards each other. However, there's a contrasting theory called resource exchange. This is an evolution-based theory proposing that in heterosexual dating in particular, that males can trade their occupational status, so wealth or having sort of a big name job, for physical attractiveness in females. The resource exchange is sort of the stereotypical rich old man marrying the young attractive woman. I don't know if anyone in here has ever seen the movie Best in Show. If you haven't, highly recommend. It's an oldie but a goodie. In that there is a relationship where like the man is so old he doesn't really communicate anymore, and his young attractive wife is trying to name things they have in common. She's like, we both like talking and not talking. We both like snow peas and soup, right? And again, you can have relationships with big age differences where you do have a lot in common. But again, I think some of this is changing as the power dynamics, as the monetary dynamics change, although probably more slowly than a lot of us would wish. So David Buss, back in the 80s, came up with this idea that mating patterns depend on what each sex has to invest in terms of survival. And again, once again, these are all heteronormative, assuming you're going to be in a heterosexual relationship, which we know is not the case for a good percentage of people. So for men, he argued that reproductive opportunities are the most important. They show more interest in sexual activity and physical attractiveness. Sometimes this is referred to as mating widely. Like just go out and spread your sperm everywhere. And then parental investment theory argues that women will choose mates that will supply the resources needed to support their offspring for many years. And this is sometimes referred to as mating wisely. Now, I had a graduate professor who talked to us about this idea, and he was very skeptical about this facet of evolutionary psychology in general, and basically said, like, if the men want to be in relationships with the women, well, they have to like buy into the system. But then also pointed out all the ways that modern family makeups go against this, right? So in addition to same-sex couples, we have a lot of single parent homes. We have folks being raised by their grandparents, aunts and uncles, things along these lines. And again, we have women now who are the major breadwinners in a relationship. And honestly, this assumes you're at least upper middle class status, right? If you are middle class or below, the assumption in America now is both of you are gonna have to work. And if you're of the lower classes, both of you are probably gonna have to work multiple jobs, right? So this is a dated idea, but it still floats around. So gosh, maybe even like within the past 5 years, there was this controversy where a dean at Harvard, of all places, came out and made a speech and said that like women are just not as good at science. They don't have the intellectual capacity for it, and was like relating it back to this. And as you can imagine, he got roasted because there are plenty of women more modern day scientists accomplishing a lot. And there have been plenty of women behind the scenes accomplishing a lot for years. All right, so moving more firmly into talking about romantic love. The big theory here is Sternberg's triangular theory of love. And this states that all loving relationships, particularly romantic relationships, are comprised of some combination of these three components. So the first is intimacy. This is emotional intimacy. So it's warmth, closeness, sharing. Intimacy involves giving and receiving emotional support, valuing the other person, and sometimes also sharing our possessions. Intimacy is the big reason why people talk about emotional cheating, right? Or people may have never done anything physical with the other person, but they're having sort of this emotionally intimate relationship, and spouses can feel very betrayed by that. Passion are intense feelings, including sexual desire, but they can be either positive or negative or both. So passion involves the need for control and dominance, nurturance, and self-esteem. So passion is sexual attraction, but it like goes beyond that to these intense feelings for each other. Commitment is the decision and intent to maintain a relationship. Decision and intent to maintain a relationship. And this is in spite of the difficulties and costs that may arise. So the decision and intent to maintain a relationship in spite of the difficulties and costs that may arise. And commitment can change over the course of a relationship. So short term, it's just the decision to essentially hang out with this person, right? And then maybe become exclusive. And then in long term, it is doing things to maintain the relationship, right? So my parents for a while, they're coming up not too long on 50 years of marriage. And for a while they had a jar of like date ideas. And every weekend they'd pick one out and they'd go on a date together, which I just think is like sort of adorable, right? But like that works for them. Based on this triangular theory, Sternberg came up with 7 types of relationships that can result from the presence or absence of each of those 3 components. And in this theory, the ultimate type of love is consummate love, in which you have all 3 of the components. And consummate here is to make complete or to make perfect. So this is to Sternberg, the ideal, perfect, complete relationship. And that's not to say you can't have a fulfilling relationship that doesn't have all 3, right? And sometimes that really works for people. And so this is the triangular theory. And so again, we have intimacy, passion, and commitment. And there are combinations of 2, and there are just the 1. And then again, we already talked about consummate, which is having all 3. So let's say we just have intimacy. We just have that warmth and closeness. Sternberg referred to this as liking in a relationship. And this can be a basis for a romantic relationship, but it ends up sometimes being more like roommates or friendship in that case. And again, sometimes that really works for people, depending on your sexuality. If you are asexual or gray sexual or demisexual, right? That might really work for you. If you just have passion, Sternberg referred to this as the infatuate relationship. And again, this is, you're going to have a big spark, you're going to enjoy, maybe you're going to not only have a really good physical relationship, but really passionate arguments, right? And again, for some people that works. And then if you just have commitment without liking each other or having passion, Sternberg called that an empty relationship. And again, for some people this works, and sometimes they might choose this because of logistics, right? So there might be an economic advantage to being married. You know, it could be to get someone a green card or something along those lines. But the hope is that you'll eventually develop at least some liking for the person, right? And then you would be what is then called a companionate relationship. So this is where you do like that person, you enjoy that intimacy, that warmth and closeness with them, and you are committed to them. And again, people can have very good relationships this way. If you have the intimacy and the passion, but not commitment, then he just called this romantic, which is kind of funny because like the whole thing is a theory of romantic love, right? But he said, you know, this is like, you're gonna have a very nice romantic, good dates, good physical experience. But if there's no commitment, again, sometimes that works for people, particularly people who are in open relationships. But for other people, this is not gonna feel fulfilling. And then you can have passion and commitment, but without actually liking each other. That sounds so weird, but it's true. And he called that fatuous, where again, you have a really hot spark, you're committed to each other, but you know, you don't necessarily have that warmth, that intimacy, or maybe even like each other. And again, if you have all three, then that's what Sternberg says we're aiming for. Now, one thing that's really interesting, and if you've taken 101 already, you've heard about some of this already, is there is a theory of development called attachment theory. And in sort of child development, the idea is your initial caregiver, often a parent, often the mother was assumed initially, but now, again, can be whoever your primary caregiver is. Grandparent, aunt, uncle, foster parent, who, what have you. But the way they interact with you is going to create either a secure or insecure attachment, and that will influence things in your life. And so Hazen and Shaver drew a connection between those early attachment patterns and the quality of people's later romantic relationships. So this is something that a lot of our students have been really interested in, particularly those who do capstone research projects. We've often had students kind of look at this adult attachment style, because I think it ends up being really interesting to people to sort of reflect on, where am I at and what is that like for me? So attachment style here is going to refer to the typical ways of interacting in close relationships. And I'll kind of walk you through this diagram. So again, when you're very young, your parents are warm and responsive, you cry as a baby, you need something, they're there right away, they're helping you out. Then the idea is that is going to lead to, as an infant, what's called secure attachment. The way this is often tested in research is the idea that you have the parent leave the room for a very short amount of time, the baby is always supervised, and then come back in and you see how the baby reacts. With secure attachment, they'll get a little upset, they'll be able to self-soothe, and when the parent comes back in, they like welcome them with open arms. And the idea is, hopefully that will then translate into secure attachment as an adult, where people find it relatively easy to get close to others and are comfortable depending on them and having them depend on them back. And don't worry about abandonment or someone getting too close. And about 55% of adults would fall under the secure romantic attachment. They tend to trust others, find it easy to get close to others, and have the longest lasting relationships. The idea is, if, again, when you're young, your parent is cold and rejecting, not very responsive, you're not their highest priority, maybe you get the impression your parent didn't even want you, then you might develop what's called avoidant attachment. And here what would happen is, if you had the parent leave the room, the child wouldn't really get upset, and the parent comes back in, the child might even ignore them. So like, well, you don't care about me anyway, so what's the difference? And the idea is that can translate into avoidant attachment as an adult. Or people are uncomfortable being close to others, find it difficult to trust other people, difficult to allow themselves to depend on other people. They're nervous when people get too close. And so their partner will want them to have that emotional intimacy, and they will feel very uncomfortable with it. About 25% of adults are here. They're uncomfortable getting close to others. They have trust issues. And people who have avoidant attachment as adults are the least likely to have good romantic relationships because they tend to push people away. Now, if your caregiver was ambivalent or inconsistent with you as a child, sometimes warm, sometimes not, seemingly they have their own agenda, got in the way of receptiveness and responsiveness to the child's needs, love them, but didn't always show it, then you might form what's called anxious ambivalent attachment. So here, this is characterized by the child getting very upset when their caregiver leaves the room. And then when the caregiver comes back in, they might kind of like be wary and not want to go to them because it's like, again, they're not trusting them. So then the idea is, again, you're going to develop anxious ambivalent attachment as an adult. They would find that others are reluctant to get as close as they would like. So these are clingy people. They worry their partner doesn't love them or doesn't want to stay with them. They kind of want to like merge with this person, and that can scare people away, not surprisingly. This is about 20% of the adult population. And this can get pretty bad where they get obsessive and preoccupied with their relationships, have fears of abandonment, get jealous over reasons they don't need to get jealous of, which of course will lead to what they're most afraid of, their partner leaving them. So, it is possible that this does carry over. And we certainly probably all know people who have sort of interacted with partners in these different ways. So in 1991, Bartholomew and Horowitz developed a 4-category model. So they added another category of the adult attachment styles. And they looked specifically at 2 different factors. People's perceptions of their own self-worth, whether those are positive or negative, and people's perceptions of other people's trustworthiness and reliability. So again, is that positive or negative? So this leads to this diagram. And this is the Bartholomew model. It draws on Bowlby's pioneering work on infant attachment. It conceptualizes adult attachment as rooted in abstract images of oneself, as worthy of love and support or not, and of others, as trustworthy and available versus unreliable and rejected. Adult self-views and views of others are assessed with a structured interview. And then based on their responses, people are categorized into one of these 4 attachment styles. So if you have a positive view of yourself, a positive view of the trustworthiness of others, then you'll develop what's called secure attachment. You'll be comfortable with intimacy, but also comfortable kind of being on your own as well. If you have a positive view of others, but a negative view of yourself, then this is where you have what they call preoccupied. And this is more like the ambivalent one we just talked about, where you're preoccupied with the relationship, you might be clingy, and that clinginess itself might drive people away. If you have a positive view of yourself, but aren't sure you can trust other people, then you might end up with what they call the dismissing attachment style. You dismiss intimacy. Counter-dependent means you don't want to be dependent on anybody, right? You really cling to that independence. And again, in its own way, this can drive people away. And if you have a negative image of yourself and also think that people are not trustworthy and reliable, then you'll have what they refer to as the fearful attachment style, where you'll be fearful of intimacy and socially avoidant. So just maybe not even like go out and meet other people. So the primary difference between this model and the previous model is essentially having two forms of avoidant attachment. So that we have the fearful avoidant, but then we also have the dismissing avoidance. So the fearful avoidant, they have negative self-views, but also negative views of each other, of other people. And dismissing avoidant, they feel good about themselves, but not about other people. There is no like right or wrong between these two models. They're just two different ways of conceptualizing the same information, basically. And this happens, like we saw with personality, a lot in psychology. So thinking about romantic love as a type of attachment, what we find from research is that people who are securely attached have healthier, more satisfying relationships. There's probably nothing about that surprises anyone in here right now, right? If you feel pretty confident in yourself and in your relationship, it's probably going to be healthier. People who have this style as well are more likely to have a partner who is also securely attached. So instead of attractiveness, you are seeking out someone who has a similar attachment style to you without even knowing it. And it's entirely possible that these early bonding experience might produce these enduring relationship styles as you grow up. And in particular, these tendencies tend to be the most noticeable under stress. So securely attached people, when they're stressed out, will both seek support, but also give it to others around them. Avoidant attached people will withdraw and become angry when asked to give or receive support. And anxiously attached people will become fearful or show hostility in these scenarios where there's stress. And is there like an ideal match between, maybe someone who's anxiously attached and someone who's avoidant? We haven't really figured that out yet, other than knowing that two securely attached people are going to do better in general. All right, the next thing we're going to start talking about is persuasion. And so this is convincing people to do things. Taken to the extreme, this is manipulation, right? And people who know this stuff can use it to their advantage in things like advertising, sales, things along those lines. So persuasion involves the communication of arguments and information intended to change another person's attitudes. I'll say that again, that's very wordy. So persuasion involves the communication of arguments and information intended to change another person's attitudes. And attitudes are beliefs and feelings that people have. And they can be beliefs and feelings about other people. They can be beliefs and feelings about objects, like say a product. Or they can be beliefs and feelings about ideas, say a political idea. So there are different elements of the persuasion process. So the first is the source. This is who is sending the message. Often this is a person who's sending the message, but sometimes it can be the company that's sending the message, right? A political party who's sending the message. They're the source. The receiver is the person to whom that message is being sent. So that's often us, right? The public. Sometimes it's a more specific subset of the public. I don't know how much you've all been running into these YouTube ads lately, but I've been getting a lot about how liberal one of the candidates is. She votes with Nancy Pelosi. And it's like, for a lot of people, they'd be like, okay. But for a certain proportion of the population, the word liberal is like, sets cats on fire, right? So like they're using those words purposely to get at those particular receivers. The message is the information that's being transmitted by the source. So the information transmitted by the source, what they're saying. And then the channel is the medium through which the message is sent. The medium through which the message is sent. So this could be a YouTube ad, a TV ad, political signs, product placement in the drugstore. What's on that end cap right when you walk in, right? This could be information that you see in the waiting room at your doctor's office. This could be things you see when you're flipping through the newspaper, right? This could be things that your professor tells you in class, right? There's all kinds of different channels by which, and now, I mean, the biggest channel probably now, especially for both your generation and my generation, is social media, right? Like, I don't know about y'all, but I rarely sit down and like watch the news at 10 o'clock at night. Instead, I'm getting my headlines via Twitter, emails sent to me from news sources, things along those lines. And so this is a diagram of those features, right? So we have source factors, who the source is. Are they credible? Do they seem to have some expertise, right? Do they seem trustworthy? Are they likable? Are they attractive? Are they similar to us in some way? Right? This likability and attractiveness component is one of the reasons why celebrities are often used for endorsements for products, right? They're often very attractive people. If they're seen as likable, that's going to give us more positive feelings towards particular products. Message factors. Are we going to be appealing to logic, or are we going to try to get fear? Again, liberal, or whatever that fear word is, right? Is the argument going to be one-sided, just presenting, this is the way, this is the right thing? Or is it going to be talking about both sides like an essay and sort of discrediting one side? And repetition. The best example of repetition, and this might predate y'all a little bit, but there was this ad when I was growing up for this product called Head On. And it was just like, head on, apply directly to the forehead. Head on, apply directly to the forehead. And like, I still remember it because they would just repeat it 5 times every time the darn commercial came on, right? And so sometimes that gets stuck in your head. The channel factors, you know, is it face-to-face or over the phone? This is why a lot of political parties or charities still try to call you because they think that if they make that personal attachment, right, that you're more likely to donate, what have you. Is it, again, a news hour on TV, an ad on TV? You know, audio tape is a little old school, right? But maybe a podcast would be the equivalent in this day and age, right? Or again, is it on social media? Things along those, I mean, Russian bots, right? They are a big factor when people see them and they believe them. And then receiver factors, your personality is gonna influence how open you are to certain ideas. Expectations, right? So this is one of the reasons why we're still trying to figure out how to convince people climate change is actually happening. Because so many people just like don't get this expectations part of it. And then pre-existing attitudes, right? This has been, again, a big factor in things like vaccines, because there was a big movement for, you know, a decade and a half before COVID even happened that vaccines are horrible and they're going to poison you. And this is why a lot of people have not gotten their vaccines still and are not even considering getting the new, more effective booster, for example, which can obviously be problematic. All right, we will stop there and pick back up on Wednesday. See if anybody else signed on. Nope, looks like I got everybody.